In the previous video, I talked about American politics going left to right, liberal, conservative, liberal, conservative. The Gilded Age was definitely a conservative time period. The era that follows it, the era that's going to basically be an adjustment towards the conservative Gilded Age, is the liberal progressive era. In fact, today, a lot of liberals are going to actually use the word progressive to describe themselves. So at the turn of the century, 1901 to 1917-ish, the country turns its attention back to internal affairs. We engaged in a massive burst of reforms that addressed almost every single issue in the United States, with the exception of race. These reforms were identified with progress. Therefore, the people who pushed these would call themselves progressives. Thus, when it goes down, it's going to be called the progressive era. Now, as to what was going on here, if you remember, Mark Twain called the previous era what? The Gilded Age? Pretty on the outside, not so pretty on the underneath. Well, this was an attempt to deal with some of that stuff that wasn't so pretty underneath. Progressive President Woodrow Wilson said in 1913, "Evil has come with the good. With riches has come inexcusable waste. We have been proud of our industrial achievements, but we have not stopped to count the cost." This period, therefore, is about dealing with the Gilded Age. Now, there are people out there who did not approve of what was going on and called for radical change. They offered a radical change to what was occurring. This was called the Socialist Party of America, led by Eugene Debs. This isn't a reform party. It's a radical party. They wanted the government to own the means of production and distribution. It's a radical call, going from private ownership to public ownership. Now, some people say that the progressives were only a continuation of the populism, but that's really not the case. The progressives might have wanted the same things as the populists, but they also had differing aspects, right? The populists were popular in the South and in the West, and were never national, yet the progressives were. Teddy Roosevelt was from New York, and while Woodrow Wilson is most identified with New Jersey, you have to remember he actually was born in Georgia. Nevertheless, the populism comes in hard times. The progressive era comes in a time of plenty. Populist leaders were from the lower and middle classes. The leaders of the progressives were from the upper class. The leadership was different, and progressivism was much more broad and much more successful in the long run. If it wasn't populism under a different name and the country was prosperous, what were the reasons for reform? I want to give you a general reason of why people wanted to clean up the issues of the Gilded Age. But more specifically, why was this happening at this time? Essentially, the American dream was being under threat. The American dream, go from rags to riches, right? We need to believe this in this country. It keeps people staying motivated to succeed. The American dream during the Gilded Age, a lot of progressives thought, was being in danger of being snuffed out, and thus they needed to have a major correction.